let me just take a moment to talk about how my grandparents got saved. You know, my grandma mentioned in the video that I played earlier that she got saved as a result of her Aunt Lucy, who was a great soul winner and would witness to a lot of the down and outers. And she won my grandma to the Lord. And when Grandma got together with Grandpa, he wasn't saved. He was actually from kind of a Jack Mormon household up in Idaho. And he hopped on a freight train when he was 16 years old, came down to Los Angeles and worked there, went into the military and so forth. So he was raised in a Jack Mormon type of home. And when he got together with Grandma, he went to her church because, you know, he needed to learn about Christ and become saved and be a Christian, be Baptist. So he went to her Baptist church. Well, the pastor of the Baptist church that her family was going to at that time was John Macarthur. But it was his dad, not the John Macarthur you're familiar with, out at the the Masters College out in Santa Clarita, California. But that John Macarthur Jr., this was his dad as the pastor of the church where she went. So Grandpa goes with Grandma to this church, and at the invitation time, you know, they nudged him to go forward to receive Christ as Savior. So Grandpa, Dwayne Anderson, he goes down to the front to receive Christ as Savior, and the pastor, John Macarthur Sr., takes him off into a room to deal with him. So they're thinking like, okay, you know, he's in there getting the gospel. Because lots of churches we've been to, that's what they do. You come to the altar, somebody takes you aside, they get you the gospel, they get you saved. Well, he takes him into the office, and he asked my grandpa, he says, so, you know, what would you like to talk to me about today? And he said, well, you know, I'm here to get saved. I'm here to receive Christ as Savior. And the pastor said, well, did you hear my sermon today? And he said, yeah, I heard the sermon. Okay, well then you're saved. Okay, see you later. And he walked out of there thinking that he's saved, still totally unsaved. And the thought that came through his mind when he walked out of there is like, well, this guy has just pronounced me saved, and I feel like I'm just as good and moral as Helen and her brothers are. You know, he's looking at her brothers and her parents, and he decided that he's as good as they are. He didn't understand the gospel because that wicked pastor didn't give him the gospel, didn't present him the gospel. He just had this stupid Calvinist garbage of just, oh, well, you're either the chosen or you're not. I guess if you're here listening to me preach, you must be one of the elect. You must be saved. It's garbage. So he was on his way to hell as a result of that. So then they got married, you know, but Grandma thought he's saved. You know, he went into the room, he came out and said, I'm saved now. And so Grandma just assumed he's saved. But over the course of their marriage, it became apparent to Grandma that Grandpa wasn't saved. She realized after a while, wait a minute, you know, she thought she's marrying a saved man, but she realized, wait a minute, Grandpa's not saved. He wasn't Grandpa back then. Okay, I'm just calling him that. But she said, wait a minute, my husband's not saved. So she began to pray for him. Now, he was very prosperous at this time. He was financially prosperous. If you know anything about the history of Los Angeles, California, you know, after World War II, the late 40s, 50s was just a huge boom in Southern California where there was a lot of money to be made. And so my grandpa had some businesses. He had a Sherwin-Williams paint store. And then he also had teamed up with the guy who founded Hot Dog on a Stick. And he was making these trailers and selling them to the Hot Dog on a Stick guy, and he was using them for his business. And so he's just making money hand over fist, just thousands and thousands of dollars a week back then. You know, thousands and thousands of dollars a week now is a lot of money. But he was making, how many thousands a week was he making? He'd make like $5,000 a week back then. So he's making tons of money, and he got into drinking, and Grandma prayed for him and prayed and said, Lord, whatever it takes for him to get saved. She just wanted him to get saved. And obviously as his wife, she's enjoying the bounty of all this money that's coming in. But she prayed and said, Lord, if it will lead to him getting saved, I'm willing to lose everything. Take all the money away, because she knew that it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to be saved. So she prayed that he would lose everything, that everything would be taken away if that's what it would take. And that's what happened. He ended up losing his businesses. he ended up losing it. And you know, after he lost all that and got saved, he never really became rich ever again in his life. I mean, he always did well. He always had $100 bills in his wallet, but he never really was rich like that again because God had to take that away from him in order to be saved. But that shows you the heart of Grandma, that she was willing to give that stuff up, and she was instrumental in his salvation through her prayers. So here's how he actually ended up getting saved. A 5-year-old boy came to him. They had just moved to a new area, and they were going to look for a new church. So they had a list of churches that they were going to try. So they tried a bunch of churches, but they hadn't really settled on anything. Well, there was a little boy who lived on their street. He was 5 years old, and he came up to Grandpa and started preaching the Romans Road to Grandpa and giving him the gospel. And my grandpa was so impressed by this little 5-year-old boy just rattling off scriptures at him, just hitting him with all these verses. He said, you know, let's go try this kid's church. He was impressed by that. And so they ended up trying that church. It was Faith Baptist Church in Canoga Park, Pastor Roland Rasmussen. And I wasn't one of the ones on their list, but because of this 5-year-old boy, they ended up going there. They visited the church, and then a couple days later on a Tuesday evening, Pastor Rasmussen and one of the deacons came over to his house to do a follow-up visit on his visit to the church, and they won him to Christ in his living room. And my dad got saved, I believe, the same time, right? Or you got saved a few days later? Yeah, so but just that same week, my dad and my grandpa got saved through the soul winning of that church, Faith Baptist Church in Canoga Park. But it also went back to that little 5-year-old boy. And it also went back to the prayers of Grandma. But it's certainly no thanks to John Macarthur, false prophet, lying devil that him and his son both are. And you know what? By the way, that's not the heritage that we inherited from Grandma. We didn't inherit Calvinism. We didn't inherit being a Presbyterian. We didn't inherit John Macarthur and the Master's College. You know what we inherited? The King James Version, salvation by grace through faith. We inherited soul winning and the Romans Road. We inherited the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ as our only means of salvation. So there's a powerful story about how Grandpa got saved. And of course, he got saved, he got in church, began to grow. And one of the things that he struggled with was alcohol. And he went to a sermon one time where Pastor Rasmussen was preaching on the story of Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall. And if you remember in that story, when Belshazzar drinks wine, he ends up getting bold and saying, hey, let's bring in all the gold and silver that we stole from God's house. And let's drink wine, and let's give that to our girlfriends and everything else. Let's party with the vessels that we've stolen from God's house. And then, of course, God sends that handwriting on the wall of judgment. But Grandpa, when he heard that sermon, he thought to himself, you know, that's how I get when I drink. I get arrogant. I get cocky. I get bold to do that which is wrong. And as a result of that sermon, he quit drinking. And he became a great soul winner. He became a deacon in that church. He actually founded a church that's still in existence in Southern California today. He was a great soul winner. And when you talk to people who knew him from that era, they'll tell you, boy, that guy won souls. And how he would win the hard cases to Christ. And so he and Grandma were godly people. They loved the Lord. They were independent, fundamental Baptists. And it's a great heritage. And you know what? Without them, there would be no Ray Anderson. Without Ray Anderson, there'd be no Stephen Anderson. There'd be no Faith Forward Baptist Church. You know, this place wouldn't even be here. Amen? You know, it goes back to Grandma in many ways. So we're very thankful for everything that Grandma taught us, for the time that we spent with her. We love her. We love Grandpa. And we're looking forward to seeing them in heaven. And, it might seem like a long time, but before we know it, we're all going to be there. Life is just a vapor.